Now that's reservations as in a feeling of doubt or uncertainty about something. That kind of reservation. The reserve shooter is one of the more controversial weapons in the game right now. Some might say it's overpowered, or annoying, or stupid. Little Timmy, the self-proclaimed Pyro main, calls it the worstest weapon in the game because the man melter looks cooler. No, Timmy. No. Part of the problem with the weapon is that it's kind of mediocre on Soldier. Not bad, just situational. But it's also really, really good on Pyro. So nerfing it would be pretty unfair to the Soldier. You know, the class it was intended for. It wasn't always equipable to Pyro. It's a lot easier for the Pyro to get enemies consistently in the air, or keep them in the air, or shoot them before they land. It takes Soldier a lot more effort. A rocket isn't always going to knock an enemy airborne in the same pattern, or as high, and more often than not, just shooting a second rocket is going to do the same job as switching to the reserve shooter and blasting him that way. It has its moments, but it's more situational than it is on Pyro. And Pyro not only benefits from its stats better, but combination with the degreaser allows you to take it out even quicker and get more use out of it that way. And your first air blast will block air strafings. That'll make your enemy's trajectory that much easier to follow up on. Alright, so you got a kind of meh weapon for Soldier, and a weapon that's probably too good on Pyro. And they're the same weapon. Now what? How do you fix this? Well, you want to know what I think? Probably not, but you're going to watch anyway, you punk. Here's what you do, maybe. You pull an equalizer. You split it into two weapons. The original creator even made a Pyro-specific skin. You could just use that, give it a different name, you know. That way, you can properly balance the weapon for each class. I do like the idea of having unique weapons equipable to more than one class, but you gotta make sure it's fair. And I used to think that there could have been a good middle ground for Soldier and Pyro, but at this point, I kind of doubt it. You're gonna probably need to split it if you want to make it properly balanced for each one, you know. So, the Soldier, what do you do? Here would be my take on it. Obviously, this version is no longer equipable to the Pyro, and actually one more thing in terms of sort of downsides. The reserve shooter is actually slightly better than the stats let on. It says right there that it deploys 20% faster, but it also has the hidden ability of holstering 15% faster. I mean, that's a pretty minor upside, and if they're not going to put it in the description, we could just get rid of it, replace it with something better, maybe. Maybe even something as simple as a plus 10% damage bonus. If all the pellets connect, that's going to bring the base damage from 60 to 66, and the max damage from 90 to 99. And right now, the max mini-crit damage is about 122. With that damage bonus, it would bring the max to 134. That's not a huge buff, but I don't think it needs to be. The reserve shooter is decent on Soldier. And the fact that it would do more damage, deploy faster, and mini-crit launch targets, I would imagine that it could give the stock shotgun a run for its money. And for Pyro, I don't think it should be nerfed to the ground, but maybe require a little more effort to get those higher damages. And I actually have an idea to give it a new upside, but it will play into the downgrades that the weapon would get, I guess. But first, also remove the faster holster speed on this one, like on the Soldier version, for consistency at least. Now, the reserve shooter originally had a 3-shot clip. I imagine it was increased for Soldier's sake, without really taking too much consideration in for how the weapon worked on Pyro. It just made the shooter a better shotgun on top of the other gimmicks that Pyro could easily capitalize on. So I'd say back to the minus 50% clip size for this one. That way, there's at least a little bit more punishment for if you miss your shots. Alright, okay. Let me explain that new upside. Maybe, in a little bit similar way to the Soldier version, we give it a plus 10% damage bonus versus burning players. And then, change mini-crits versus launch targets to plus 20% damage bonus versus launch targets. This means if the target is both burning and airborne, the shot will do plus 30% damage. Or possibly plus 32%, depending on how it's calculated. Either way, it sounds good, and it is, but it's a pretty significant downgrade from a mini-crit. A mini-crit is plus 35% damage, but it also ignores fall-off. Because of how Air Blast works, you're usually going to be pushing someone, away from you. So now, shooting a launch target with this version of the reserve shooter will have the pellets do less damage with farther distances. Plus, to get the max damage, you're going to need to make sure you puff them with your fire first real quick, which you were probably going to do anyway, but now you got to make sure you take the time to do that if you want to get the higher damage. So, overall less damage on airborne targets, it's now affected by fall-off, and it would have a smaller clip. But you do get the new bonus of having more damage versus burning players. Slightly. So that'd be cool, right? And it would now be a Pyro weapon that didn't have a crit gimmick. Can those exist? And well, that'd be my take on how to possibly fix the reserve shooter. I don't know, what do you think should be done? Is it fine the way it is? You could also argue that there's a problem that the first air blast blocks air strafing that kind of plays into the weapon. And I would argue that, but for simplicity's sake, I just addressed the weapon itself. And you could also argue that Pyro is underpowered, so it needs an overpowered weapon to compensate, which I heard sort of a lot of when people defended the old original degreaser. But I really disagree with the balancing logic behind that. If you need a really good weapon with minor downsides to give better options to a class, it's just a band-aid fix that was slapped on that really didn't address the flaws with the character in the first place. Not that that's necessarily what the reserve shooter did, but I don't know. I lost where I was going with this. We're done here, right? We're done. This video's over.